Ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to the Iron Bark podcast, and I am your host, Epion. And today, we're going to talk about dire wolves. Not the extinct kind, the de-extinct kind. That's right, Colossal Biosciences has brought back the dire wolf. After 10,000 years, finally, it walks the earth again, risen from the ashes of decaying genomes and fossils. Here is the dire wolf. How was that for an intro? You gotta love it. Anyway, so this to me is amazing, awesome, the best thing that ever happened, the most wonderful thing. And you can ask a lot of people. I know wonderful things. But seriously, I think it's the best. I think it's so awesome for conservation, for rewilding, for just scientific innovation, which leads to discovery. And who knows what more will come from studying DNA, genomes, biology, what benefits it will yield for humanity. That's part of it. A lot of stuff gets discovered by accident in life, in the world, through science, and maybe this will yield many fruit. I'm about it. I support it 100%, 110% actually. Let's get the numbers up there. Okay, but this whole thing is, of course, not without its criticisms and its mild controversies. I'm going to unpack a bit of them. Some of the comments I've seen on X, I want to address some of them, and I'm going to rely a lot on what Ben Lamb had to say about it in his podcast interview with Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan Experience, because I feel like he puts some of the controversy into a good perspective. And the way he articulated it, and he explained I'm going to fail to say this, speciation, was very good. It was very well worded. It was very well explained. A lot of people won't be happy or satisfied with it, but nonetheless, I think it gets the foot in the door and allows for acceptance of what this is. So the major controversy in this is that, is this actually a dire wolf, bro? Is this actually a dire wolf? Is this just a gray wolf with like altered genes? And so it's okay, but let's unpack that a bit. So the controversy is that allegedly not actually a dire wolf. Or there's people that it doesn't fit their definition of what a dire wolf is. All right. This gets a bit. So what Ben had to say was that this was philosophical perspective versus scientific perspective. So the concept of speciation is more or less a human construct, or less an undecided or unagreed upon construct that we are trying to impose on nature, but it's something that flows more like a river than a rock. So like a solid definition is very difficult to put on it. It kind of reminds me of trying to put a definition on life itself. Because even under some definitions, something like fire can meet the definition of life. So when thinking about it, it's like, if you compare species that are similar, coyotes, wolves, and dogs, they share like 99% of their DNA. But they are definitely different creatures and animals altogether. So even slight variations and genetic differences can result in entirely different species. This one has enough, I would say, would definitely classify it as at least a subspecies. Now, is it one for one exact with the former dire wolf? That seems unlikely because the genome or DNA they used was incomplete, but they seem to map most of it, I think. And we're going to dig into it a bit deeper here. So, what is the status quo of academic scientists when it comes to the definition of speciation? There's a few different definitions. Some of them go by geographic isolation. Some of them go by, can they interbreed? Some of them go by, do they serve the same ecological function? Which one is it? Is it like exactly by DNA, and is it exactly by difference in DNA or genetics? So this is what something Ben said in the podcast. There was a paper that said dire wolves were more closely related to jackals as opposed to wolves. But that paper, at the time, they only had 0.15% of the genome. But now we have much more of the genome data, and it turns out they're actually more closely related to wolves than they were jackals. So it's a continuously growing and evolving thing, which is science. But people like to they don't like, so if you wrote the paper saying that, oh, dire wolves are more closely related to jackals, you'd be kind of offended that more science came out that proved you wrong, because that was like your claim to fame. It was something that was like, whoa, revolutionary, impactful, important, new at the time. But that's not it anymore. And this is where science gets kind of weird, because the whole point of science is supposed to be new developments, new data, consider the new data, and move with it. And then maybe it flips back and forth over time on what is what, but eventually you come to an answer or a pretty solid agreement on, yeah, this seems pretty factual. So we also look at a paleontologist's definition of what a species is. And they go strictly by what we call tooth morphology. And they say that because it's the only thing that will be persistent over time. Now, this becomes interesting because what if you could genetically engineer an animal to, let's say, a mammoth, for example, you make an elephant that has, well, the exact same tooth morphology as a mastodon or an elephant. Does it then now reach the definition or the standard which paleontologists have put on like speciation? It gets kind of convoluted, right? Like, it's like, well, whatever definition you want to put on it, you could kind of meet that definition. The only definition you couldn't really meet is like 1-to-1. It's a dire wolf, but for like, what did dire wolves exist for? Like 100,000 years, maybe, longer. Over the course of that time, that species changed subtly throughout the years. Subspecies evolved because there was probably others living in different regions. There were some that developed, little ecological evolutionary benefits. Maybe that has slightly more curved teeth, maybe a slightly thicker skull, different colored fur because the environments they were hunting in benefited a different coloration more so than the other. Maybe one was open plains, maybe one was more forest, semi-forest, maybe one was more Arctic. The dire wolves we have here from Colossal Biosciences, they're white, so that might be indicative that they were in a snowy environment, an Arctic, subarctic or Arctic environment. Another thing Ben brought up in his interview with Joe was sort of the comparison of polar bear versus grizzly bear. When we look at a polar bear and a grizzly bear, we can look at them and definitely identify one is not the other, and one is, a grizzly bear, one is a polar bear. One's larger, white, sort of a shorter, rounded snout. That's the polar bear. The grizzly bear has a hump on its back. It's brown. It's got kind of like a large, wide face. However, despite both of these being designated as two different species, they can interbreed. And not only can they interbreed, they create hybrids, and those hybrids are reproductively viable, so they can have children themselves or offspring. So are they really two different species or are they just bears? See, the waters get a little muddied here. Is a polar bear just a semi-aquatic, cold-adapted bear? Another point they brought up was some humans have a percentage of Neanderthal DNA, but we don't consider ourselves to be hybrids, right? We're just humans. But we can definitely say, like, we're Neanderthals a subspecies or a different species altogether. I want to dig a bit deeper into, like, the species definition on Geographic. So, once again, going back to the Ben Lamb podcast, a paper out there for a species of toad. So there's a paper out there for a species of toad. All right. And what humans did is they built a road through this environment where toads resided and lived. And they're the same species of toad. Humans just built a road through their home, through their habitat. So it's the exact same species on both sides of the road. However, because this kind of meets the definition of geographic isolation of a species, a paper actually exists out there where the toad on either side of the road is a different species because it meets that criteria. So what we can say about the dire wolf is that it's a functionally de-extinct version of the dire wolf. And why is that? Well, it can meet certain other definitions. It meets the ecological function definition of a species. It does the exact same thing. It's a predator, pack hunter. It also has the lost biodiversity phenotypes that you would have seen in dire wolves. White fur, the kind of main thing, the body shape, the skull. Well, that doesn't look like a normal wolf. Definitely looks like a dire wolf. You know, people want to say it's a gray wolf, but would you call a grizzly bear a polar bear? You wouldn't. So, I implore you to consider those facts. The main argument is just that there's not enough DNA. But, like I said earlier, it meets the definition of morphologically and ecologically the same as a dire wolf. It's the layman's dire wolf. Just like a polar bear isn't a semi-aquatic adapted grizzly bear for the north. This kind of goes... Now, the other criticism that came up was, why do it? What are we gaining here from doing this? Well, the thing is, innovation leads to discovery. It breeds discovery. A lot of things were founded by mistake or on purpose. Maybe something like this will lead to discovering a cure for cancer and having it be applied to the human genome, the human biology. We don't know, but hell, it's worth a shot if you ask me, to just kind of go down that road and figure it out down that rabbit hole. So a couple good things that they're doing, Colossal Biosciences, all the tech developed goes to helping species close to extinction. They've developed a ton of new technologies, and they plan on making them all open source so that other people can do similar things. They're not patenting their technologies. They've even developed a way to clone from blood, essentially clone from blood. And so Ben Lamb went on to talk about 15 red wolves left in North Carolina. So this species is almost functionally extinct. Throughout the podcast, he went on to explain there are other wolves in Louisiana which were studied, and it turns out there are actually more red wolf than the red wolves in North Carolina. And the reality of all life is that it's a admixture, and it's all kind of just mixing together and hybridizing over time. So I don't know if you guys really know this, but like wolves and coyotes can interbreed. It's a lot of muddied up genetics there. Mule deer and white-tailed deer can also interbreed. And I think even in theory, a big horned sheep and a mountain goat could yield an offspring, though I don't think that one would be reproductively viable. But there's always these weird mutations that emerge, and then suddenly you have the emergence of a new species. The point I'm trying to make here is that we want to put strict parameters. We want to fit everything into a perfect little box. This is a goat. This is a sheep. This is a mule deer. This is a white-tailed deer. This is a grizzly bear. This is a polar bear. This is a wolf. This is a red wolf. This is a gray wolf. This is a timber wolf. This is a, the list goes on. We want to have, very clean cut box and edges, this and that, da. But the reality is you can't really tell what animal that is that you're looking at without really digging deep into its genetics. You could be looking at a white-tailed deer, and perhaps it's 15% mule deer. Did you know you were looking at an admixture or hybrid of a whitetail and a mule deer? No, you just thought that was a white-tailed deer. The only time you would ever really know is if it had some oddity to it, which would be morphological, which would be something you could readily identify, like its fur color, the way its horns are arranged, or its antlers. Or maybe it was filling in some weird ecological area that you wouldn't normally find that animal. And it's kind of like, how did that end up here? Either way, you would just probably end up thinking it's just an out-of-place animal. Very interesting stuff. Something for y'all to consider. I thought that was very interesting. Speciation, just kind of being this thing we haven't quite figured out yet. Reminds me a lot of life. So, moving on to the next controversial thing. And this will be more or less my thoughts and not so much a paraphrasing of Ben Lamb's, but I do agree 100% with everything he really said. But the religious stuff was interesting because it was kind of touched upon in the podcast here and there, but it was never directly addressed. And I feel like the reason for that was because it's a very sensitive, hot topic. And when you're running like a large, company or business like Colossal, you don't really want to ruffle feathers. You don't want to offend people. You don't want to be in the throes of controversy. You kind of just want to be able to, achieve your goals, and you don't want to be impeded by anything. You don't want to get like a bunch of protesters angry or religious groups upset. So I completely understand, why he wouldn't really go into it. But I'm not Ben. So I'm going to jump into it. But so here's the interesting thing from my perspective. For those of you that don't know, I do believe in God. I am Christian. But I don't believe this is so much like playing God as it is more of like a medical thing. Okay, I gotta put a disclaimer out here first. All right, I don't know anything. If God has a plan, if God has, rules and specifications, I don't know them. I could be fucking wrong about this, and then I'm, damned if I don't, right? Damned if I do. Whatever the expression is. I don't know. There's some verses in the Bible that are, kind of interesting. So like the biggest criticism here is like we shouldn't be playing God. I don't know if it's so much playing God as it is sort of just like medically, like a medical thing. It's like that probably sounds dumb to you guys, but let me kind of suss that out. Basically, you're just gene editing, right? Now, is that any different than a gene therapy vaccine? Or that was something that was used during COVID-19. Many of us took that shot, and it altered your gene in a certain way. Now, I would argue, basically the only difference here between that and cloning is sort of like one happens at contraception, one happens after. And is that the key difference? It's like some people say, well, you're creating life and only God is meant to create life. But I don't think people in this circumstance are actually creating life. Those cells are already alive. We didn't create those cells. What they're going to grow into, we didn't create. We didn't create the genes. We're editing them, but the genes were already there. We're just kind of editing them, but we didn't make the gene. We didn't create the DNA. The DNA was found elsewhere. Was if you're a person of faith, if you're a person of religious belief, you believe God created all life. And if he created life, he created those genes, he created the genome, he created, the animal. The animal's remains was created by God, and we came along and found it and constructed it, rebuilt it from the ground up, and we didn't rebuild, like, you know what I mean? Like we put it together and put it inside like a womb, and then it produced an offspring. It was in vitro fertilization. I'm sure some religious groups have different sects of Christianity have different beliefs on this stuff. Is in vitro, playing God? Because that's sort of what's happening. Like, I don't know if if we start screening for autism or Down syndrome, is that playing God? And like, you could argue doing things with animals is different than doing things with humans, because there's a lot of people that believe, animals don't go to heaven, just humans do. Only humans have a soul. So is this even applicable to animals? I'm going to read a Bible verse, and I don't know. I don't know how you interpret this. I don't know how your sect will interpret this or what it means. But Genesis 1:28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. I don't want to sound blasphemous, so give me some grace here and some forgiveness. But doesn't that kind of sound like replenish the earth? Rewild? I don't like. Does that incorporate bring things back? Would God? I don't want some blasphemy, because I don't know. I don't have the answers. I don't actually know. And I'm sorry if I'm misinterpreting these things or whatever, but would the knowledge be available to us if we weren't supposed to know it? If it, like, would it even be possible for us to do if we weren't supposed to do it? Then I know the whole free will thing, like we can murder people, we're not supposed to murder people. I know. But I'm just saying, like, it seems like it kind of ties into that a bit. And then it says subdue it. So, like, have complete control over it? Does that include genetically? Or does that just mean, like, physically? Like, domesticate it. Have dominion over them. I don't know. I feel like that means we kind of have, like, a responsibility to these animals, and to the ones previous humans have extinct, like the Steller sea cow and stuff like that, the dodo bird. Maybe we do have a responsibility to bring them back, to replenish the earth, so to speak. I'm sorry if this is angering any of you, if you were very firm in your beliefs and like that's what they taught you in church, and what I'm saying is challenging that and it's making you angry. I'm sorry. That's not my intent. I invite you to present your ideas to me and show me where I'm wrong, and correct my understanding of that, and I'll read it and I'll consider it with like an open heart and open mind. I wanted to talk about, so there's a thing, it's called it's a hypothesis sometimes often called a theory, but it shouldn't be accurately called a theory. It's called abiogenesis. I've spoken about it a handful of times on the podcast. And what essentially that is when life emerges from base materials that we consider not to be living. We have never, ever witnessed that happening in the history of all humanity, but we just seem to know that it happened. But there's a bunch of different ideas about how life originated on Earth. Panspermia, or did it just abiogenesis here out of like raw materials? But even if it came from panspermia, where was that made? Where did it come from? Did it abiogenesis somewhere else in the universe? Now, if we want to talk about playing God, that seems like something that's more out of humanity's reach. If we could do that, then perhaps that would be more of an argument for playing God. Or creating something, I don't know, that's like similar to DNA but not DNA. That seems like it's kind of like forbidden knowledge. It's like tucked away from humans ever knowing how to do it. I don't know, just food for thought. Because, I don't know, there's like a couple Bible verses that kind of like ring true to that. It's like, you can know me, but you can never understand me. I think that's like the Bible. Or you can know God, but you can never understand him. That's like kind of like life. Like, you know it's there, you know it exists, but you don't understand it. I don't know. It's kind of trippy to think about. And then when you think about like the base materials, what's like most commonly found in the universe, and like we're composed kind of like on a percent to percent basis of the same materials. It's like we kind of were made from dust in a way, like stardust, dirt, if you will. I don't know. It gets really fucking trippy. It gets trippy as shit. Anyway, we're getting a little too deep. But yeah, I don't know. I left a comment on X, and I'm kind of just going to read it verbatim. I personally don't consider it playing God. I look at it from more of a medical point of view. As a person of faith, I believe we have dominion over the animal kingdom and a responsibility to it. Perhaps this responsibility extends to de-extinction and rewilding of a lost species. This extends into a bit of a debate on how far back we should be de-extincting, but I think there is an actual built-in limit. I'm not sure if we could really do that with fossils, but we might be able to defossilize them and get amino acids. I don't know, but I think we're going to be hard capped by what we can find in permafrost. Then I start talking about the story of Noah's Ark, where he put 2 of every species on the ark, and I say that's for a purpose. Post Noah's Ark, modern day today, if you subscribe to that belief, would there really be a point, like, if they died in a massive flood, maybe that was Meltwater Pulse 1b, that resulted in the death of a bunch of charismatic megafauna in North America. You know, maybe, I don't know, 2 ways you could look at this. They were supposed to die in the flood or post-ice age, or they were saved, but they just couldn't, compete with the Meltwater Pulse 1b catastrophic event and human hunting. And as a joint, effort of things, multifaceted impact factors, they were unable to successfully live into the modern age. Because we still have elephants and we still have rhinos, we just don't have woolly elephants and woolly rhinos. Did we somehow, ancient man, play a part in the extinction of those species when they were already under extreme environmental pressures. But then the religious aspects aside, if I'm going to just kind of put my religion at the door for a moment, not everyone believes in God or has a religious belief. So I'm unsure if one religion's rules should apply to everyone unilaterally. For an example, as a Christian, I wouldn't want to adhere to other faiths' rules and regulations and have them being imposed on me, since I don't follow those faiths or believe in them. Right? And I know there can be a whole dialogue and conversation about, this is a nation found under God or a Christian founded nation, and a lot of the rules and the law and legislation are kind of borrowed from the 10 Commandments into the Justinian Code and so on and so forth, and etc. and onward. But there's been modifications to these things over time too, right? Some laws have been taken away. There's been case law introduced where there's exemptions to certain rules, like thou shalt not murder in certain circumstances. In certain jurisdictions, you may not be found guilty of taking another person's life. It's interesting. It's food for thought, right? I don't know. I'm sorry if I offended anyone. It's not my intent here. It's kind of just to have an open dialogue conversation, and I welcome any comments. I want to hear them, in fact. I want to be challenged with different ways of thinking so I can get to the truth, or in a semblance of it, or as close as I can. That's my knee-jerk reaction to things. I don't know. I think a lot of good can come from the study of biology, the study of genetics. I feel like perhaps maybe we can increase our lifespans to a certain point where we can enjoy more time on this earth with our families. We can maybe perhaps cure a lot of the things that ail us. Cancer being probably the number one. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, those kind of things. It'd be nice to get kind of a handle on those. So I'm a humans first guy, obviously, and I think potentially there's a lot of good to come from that. Anyway, folks, sorry for the late podcast. I got busy over the weekend. I did have some adventures and stuff that kind of took over most of the weekend. And then Monday came and then the news broke, and I was like, I'm going to have to do a podcast on this. I'm going to have to dig into this. It's too good not to. So I wanted to make an episode just for the dire wolves. They're incredibly beautiful. They're lovely. They're very cute. And you know what? Let's see if I can find their howl. And I'm going to end the podcast with their howl. A sound not heard for 10,000 years. Let's see, Colossal. Don't disappoint me. Let's see if we can find this. Let's see here. All right. Sends shivers down me spine. Good night, everyone. Ironbark Podcast out.